Hi, my name's Merrick, and I didn't plan to speak that night. Not at Thanksgiving, not after all those years of being silenced, but when my father threw my wife's handmade gift in the trash and looked me in the eye to say I was weak, useless, and shameful, something inside me cracked. I didn't even open my mouth before my daughter stood up for me. That's when the room went dead silent. But what came after? The lies, the threats, the truth hidden in his office drawer. That's what no one saw coming. Why did a father set a trap for his own son? And what finally made the entire house turn against him? You're about to find out. My name is Merrick Cole, the youngest son in a family that never quite knew what to do with me, except lean on me. People say being the youngest means you get pampered. Not in my house. In the Graves family, youngest meant you were the one who filled in the gaps, picked up the pieces, and stayed quiet while everyone else took the credit. Most holidays blurred together the same way. I kept things running, and they acted like the table set itself, the groceries paid for themselves, and the tension in the room wasn't riding on my shoulders. 2 days before Thanksgiving, I was driving home from work when my phone rang. The name on the screen, Dad, made something inside me tighten. I answered anyway. His tone was clipped, the way a supervisor might call someone into their office. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask about Seren or Juniper. He just said, "I need you to handle something." No warm-up, no explanation. I knew exactly what that meant. It always meant money. He didn't say the amount, but he dropped hints, little jabs that told me it wasn't small. Another bill, another mess, another chance for him to remind me that being the successful one obligated me to patch every hole he punched into his own life. While he talked, I felt that old mix of embarrassment and duty rise up. It's strange how fast you can slip back into an old role. My hands tightened around the steering wheel, and I forced my voice steady, because that's what I'd always done. And then, as if on cue, he put me on speaker. Suddenly, my brother Trenton's voice filled the car. He didn't join the call to help. He never did. He joined to turn the pressure up. "Come on, Merrick," he said, the same condescending tone he'd used our entire childhood. "Dad wouldn't ask if you couldn't do it. Don't make things harder." Hearing him sent me straight back to being 10. Him getting praised for a half-finished chore while I was scolded for missing a single detail. Dad telling me to man up when I cried after falling off the porch. Trenton getting a pat on the back while I got lectures. Some scars don't fade. They just get quieter. I took a breath and said, "I can't pay it this time." Simple words, but my voice felt thick. I waited. Silence. Long, cold, punishing silence. Dad didn't argue. That would have required emotion. He simply ended the call, as if hanging up on a telemarketer. A few seconds later, Trenton sent a text. "You always make things complicated." I pulled into the driveway, sat in the car for a moment, and let the quiet settle. The air felt heavier than usual. For the first time, I felt something shift under the surface, like the ground I'd been walking on my entire life had started to crack. Inside, Seren was at the kitchen counter. She didn't hear me come in. She was focused, her hands moving slowly as she wrapped the gift she'd made for Dad. A small wooden keepsake box she'd carved and stained herself. She believed things like effort and sincerity could soften people. I once believed that too. She looked peaceful in that moment, humming softly while tying a thin ribbon. I stood there watching her, thinking how strange it was that someone like her had chosen someone like me. I didn't tell her about the call. I didn't want to see her worry. And maybe deep down, I didn't want her to see the part of me that still hadn't learned how to walk away from family obligations, no matter how unfair they were. Later that night, after cleaning up the kitchen and checking Juniper's homework, I collected the wrapped gift and set it gently on the passenger seat of my car, so I wouldn't forget it in the morning. The ribbon caught the glow of the porch light, making it look far more hopeful than anything actually felt. As I closed the car door, I knew I was carrying more than just a present. I was carrying a truth I hadn't shared with Seren or Juniper. A truth I wasn't ready to unpack. The next morning, Houston's sky was that soft, dull gray it gets in late November, neither threatening rain nor promising sun. As we pulled into my parents' driveway, Seren reached over and touched my arm lightly, a silent way of asking, "Are you okay?" I gave a small nod, not because I was fine, but because I needed her to believe I was. Juniper was in the back seat, her legs swinging, cradling the wooden leaf she'd made with all the care a 9-year-old could give. She had wrapped it in tissue paper herself and written Papa Eldon on a sticky note, her handwriting crooked but proud. My father's pickup truck sat in the driveway, just like always. Just the sight of it was enough to bring back that old ache in my stomach, the one that started every time I had to ring their doorbell growing up. The front door opened before we even made it up the walkway. My mother, Lenora, stood smiling faintly, her apron already dusted with flour, her arms stretched toward Juniper, bypassing me entirely. "There's my sweet girl," she said, pulling Juniper into a warm hug. Then she turned to Seren, her voice soft. "You look lovely, dear." Then came Eldon. He stepped into the doorway behind her, arms crossed. His eyes passed over me like I was a piece of furniture. "You made it," he said flatly. Not "nice to see you." Not "thanks for coming." Just that. You made it. Like I was late to an appointment I didn't ask for. Inside, the house looked the same as it always did. Polished wood floors, a few fake leaves taped to the window panes, signs on the wall that read things like faith, family, forgiveness. The irony was almost too much. Serene handed over the gift she'd made, a framed embroidered cloth with "Thankful for Family" stitched carefully in warm autumn colors. It had taken her weeks. She smiled, hopeful, the way she always did with my father. Eldon looked at it for maybe a second, then set it face down on the side table without a word. Didn't thank her, didn't comment, just moved on like someone brushing crumbs off a countertop. I caught the change in her eyes. She didn't say anything, of course. Seren always tried to take the high road, but I saw it. The light flickered out just a little. Juniper stood quietly, still holding her own gift. She waited for a cue that never came. The dining room had been rearranged since last year. The long table now had Eldon squarely at the head, like a judge presiding over court. Trenton's name card was beside him. The chair next to Trenton had a "reserved" sign on it, apparently for some church elder my father had taken to inviting lately. My name wasn't on a card. Seren's or Juniper's either. Instead, 3 seats waited near the end of the table, half tucked behind the kitchen entryway. That's where we were told to sit. I didn't argue. I just guided Seren and Juniper over like it didn't bother me, though the shame burned deep. "Why are we sitting all the way over here?" Seren whispered. I didn't answer. Because how do you say, "My family's hierarchy is more carefully arranged than this place setting"? Trenton arrived 15 minutes late, booming into the room like a TV preacher, arms wide, voice loud. He gave me a one-armed hug, the kind you give to a guy you barely remember from college. Then he said, "Well, look who actually showed up this year. Some of us are still trying to catch up, huh? People laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was easier to laugh than feel uncomfortable. I smiled back, that small, tight kind of smile that says, I see what you're doing, but I'm not playing today. Conversations circled around me, never to me. I heard my uncle ask Trenton about the company's recent expansion, heard someone else mention how proud Eldon must be. I chewed my salad and counted the tiles on the ceiling. Juniper tugged on Eldon's sleeve and handed him the wooden leaf. Her eyes were wide with pride. I made it for you in art class, Papa. He took it, nodded vaguely, then tucked it into his coat pocket like a receipt. A few minutes later, as people began moving around for the meal, the leaf fell out of his jacket and landed on the floor near the guest's chair. No one saw, except me. Someone stepped on it, and I heard the faint crunch as the fragile stem cracked. I looked at Juniper. She didn't notice. But I did. I always do. Dinner started with the usual prayer. Then Eldon raised his glass, the room quieted, and the performance began. He thanked everyone, by name, for their contributions to the family. He praised Trenton for carrying the family's legacy with strength and grace. Then, with barely a glance my way, he added, and of course, we all grow at different speeds. Some folks take a little longer to find their footing. But we still love them, don't we? Polite nods. A few chuckles. Seren reached under the table and touched my knee. It was her way of anchoring me. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was tired of swallowing things. I could feel something inside pushing against my ribs, like a pressure building behind a dam. And just as the turkey was being carried in, Eldon caught my eye from across the table. He smirked. Not a big one. Just enough to let me know he thought he'd won something. It was the kind of look that says, you wouldn't dare ruin this moment. And for the first time in years, I wanted to. I wanted to say something that would wipe that look off his face. But instead, I reached down, picked up the wooden leaf from the floor, and slipped it into my pocket before anyone could see. I closed my hand around the wooden leaf as the room shifted back into motion around me. Forks clinked softly, chairs scraped, voices rose and fell. But for a moment, all of it felt far away, like I was standing underwater. The small piece of carved wood warmed in my palm, and something inside me tilted. I stayed seated, letting my breath settle, but my mind was already slipping somewhere else. The murmur of my relatives faded. The lights above the table blurred. And before I could pull myself back, a memory pushed forward, sharp, clear, and uninvited. I was 10 again, standing in my father's garage. The air smelled of sawdust and gasoline. I had spent the whole afternoon sanding a small wooden car I'd made from a scrap block. I was proud of it. I remember holding it out to him with both hands, waiting for him to look up. He barely turned his head, took it from me without interest, gave it one quick glance, then tossed it into a toolbox like it was a piece of trash he didn't want lying around. No praise, no smile, not even a simple, good job. Just dismissal. I remember standing there with my fingers curled into my shirt, wondering why nothing I gave him ever counted. That was the first time I realized affection in this house wasn't earned by effort. It wasn't earned at all. It was given to the son he chose. A voice snapped me back. "Merrick," my mother called from the kitchen doorway, "can you grab more napkins? Closet in the guest room." I nodded and rose from the table. The hallway was quieter, dimmer. I walked past family photos, Trenton's football trophies, church certificates with Dad's name on them. Not one picture of me younger than 15. When I pulled open the closet door, the smell of dust hit first. Then I saw the stack. Several boxes, still wrapped. Neat. Untouched. A thin layer of dust on top. All of them labeled with my name. Years written in my mother's handwriting. Christmas, birthdays, Father's Days. Every box sealed. Never opened, never given. I stared at them, unable to move. So they had bought things for me. They just never cared enough to hand them over. They hid them away like a chore they forgot to finish. It wasn't neglect by accident. It was neglect by choice. I didn't touch the boxes. I simply took the napkins and stepped out, closing the door gently. My hands trembled as I carried them back. I felt smaller than I had in years. My mother saw me coming and quickly turned her face, pretending to adjust a bowl on the counter. She knew. She had always known. Back at the dining table, the noise swallowed me again. Seren slid her hand over mine beneath the tablecloth. She must have felt the tension running through me, but she didn't ask. She just held on. Across from us, Trenton was laughing loudly, explaining some business deal he hadn't even signed. Dad listened to him with the kind of pride I had spent my whole childhood chasing. Then Trenton said, "Well, when Dad retires, someone's gonna have to deal with all that paperwork he keeps. You know how he is." Dad stiffened. Not much, but enough for me to see it. Someone else joked, maybe Merrick could help out. Dad let out a short laugh. He can't even handle what I already gave him. Another round of light chuckles, polite, uncomfortable. Serene's hand tightened around mine. Then Trenton added too casually, "Come on, Dad, you don't want him near those files anyway." The table quieted, just for half a second, but enough. I looked at Trenton, then at Dad. "What files?" I asked, keeping my voice even. Dad waved a hand. "Nothing important." But his eyes flickered, quick, defensive. And in that tiny movement, I felt something shift. After all these years of quiet humiliation, something finally didn't fit the pattern. There was fear in that look. Real fear. Trenton cleared his throat. "Just old stuff. Dad keeps everything. You know how he is." But his tone was shaky. He couldn't hide things the way Dad could. There was something in that office. Something they didn't want me to know. I took a slow breath and looked down the table. Dad's office door was half open, the dark room behind it barely visible from where I sat. For the first time that night, I didn't feel powerless. Dinner began again, everyone pretending the moment hadn't happened. Eldon bowed his head for prayer, thanking God for strength for family members who fall behind. The words washed over me without sinking in. I felt the wooden leaf pressing against my leg inside my pocket. Juniper's gift, her effort, her innocence, stepped on without a second thought. Just like the wooden car I'd made. Just like every piece of myself I'd handed this family. A guest bumped my foot under the table. I barely noticed, because something in me was drawing a line I had never dared to draw. A quiet shift, a quiet decision, a quiet beginning. As everyone lifted their forks, I glanced again toward the office door. Whatever was inside that room might finally explain why my father spent his entire life chipping away at me. That thought stayed with me as I pushed my chair back. The noise of forks and half-hearted conversation blurred behind me. I walked slowly, not wanting to draw attention, but the weight in my chest pushed me forward. Every step down that hallway felt deliberate, like I was walking toward a truth I had avoided for decades. The farther I moved from the dining room, the cooler the air became. The walls seemed narrower here, the house quieter, like even the structure itself knew this part of the home was off limits. Eldon's office door sat half open, just enough to reveal the corner of his desk. I paused, listening for footsteps. There were none. Only the faint hum of the refrigerator and the muffled chorus of relatives making small talk to avoid real conversations. I placed my hand on the office door and eased it open. The hinges let out a soft groan, but it wasn't loud enough to carry back to the dining room. Inside, the space was exactly as I remembered, controlled, strict, almost sterile. His military plaques lined the walls in flawless rows. The photographs were arranged like a shrine to Trenton's successes: football awards, business banquets, church events where he stood beside Dad like a chosen heir. None of me. Not one frame, not even from childhood. It stung, but not in a surprising way. Just confirmation of something I had always known. I moved farther into the room. The desk drawers were locked, naturally. A metal cabinet stood next to the desk, also locked. But on the bookshelf, half hidden behind a stack of tax folders, I spotted something unusual. A key ring. He would never leave keys lying around. That wasn't like him at all. As I reached for it, the light shifted behind me. I turned and saw Seren standing quietly in the doorway. Her face carried worry, but also something firmer. "You can't stay in here," she whispered. "If he sees—" "I know," I murmured, "but I need this." She studied me for a moment. Then she nodded, touched my arm, and stepped back into the hallway. She wasn't giving permission. She was standing guard. I turned the key ring in my hand. After a few tries, one key slid into the cabinet lock. It clicked open with a soft snap. Inside were folders held together by rubber bands, receipts, old invoices, tax papers, things that made sense for a man like him to store. But then I saw it, a thin folder tucked in the back, marked with a single letter, M. My first instinct was disbelief, then dread, then something colder. I pulled it out. Inside were photocopies of my childhood mistakes, missed homework slips, notes from teachers saying I was quiet but unfocused, old report cards with every low grade circled in bold red ink. Why keep these? Why preserve only the things he could use as evidence that I wasn't enough? Before I could process what I was holding, footsteps thundered down the hallway, fast, heavy, familiar. Then, "Merrick," Dad's voice cracked through the house, like a strike of lightning. I didn't even have time to shut the drawer. He barreled into the room, eyes blazing, and snatched the folder from my hands. "You stay out of places that don't belong to you," he barked. He shoved me hard. My back slammed against the cabinet with a metallic clatter. The sound must have carried, because suddenly Lenora appeared in the doorway, wringing her hands. Trenton followed behind her, amusement already spreading across his face. "Really?" Trenton scoffed. "Digging through his stuff on Thanksgiving?" I tried to steady myself, but Dad shoved me again, this time toward the cellar door right behind me. The door swung open, and I lost my balance, sliding onto the top step. My arm scraped the wall, the burn sharp and instant. Lenora whispered, "You should have just stayed at the table." Trenton chuckled. "Let him cool off. He always gets dramatic." Dad pointed down into the cellar. "Go, before you ruin the whole evening." I stared at him, stunned. I was a grown man, a father, and yet, in that moment, he treated me like a problem he needed to shove out of sight. I stepped down slowly, and the door slammed shut behind me. The cellar was dim, lit by a single bulb that flickered every few seconds. The air was stale, heavy with dust and old concrete. I sat on an overturned crate, chest rising and falling too fast. Above me, I could hear voices, Dad bragging about keeping order, Trenton making jokes at my expense. Every word seeped through the floorboards, and something inside me fractured. I had spent my whole life absorbing the blows he delivered with his voice, his silence, his hands. But this, being pushed into a cellar like I didn't belong upstairs with my own family, was different. It wasn't punishment. It was erasure. The door creaked open gently. Seren slipped halfway down the stairs, her eyes shining with anger, not fear. "This has gone too far," she whispered. "You don't deserve this." She held out the wooden leaf. "You dropped it." I took it from her, closing my hand around it. The edges dug into my palm in a way that steadied me. It wasn't much, a tiny carving by my daughter, but right now it felt like an anchor. Serene's voice softened. "You are not who he says you are." She backed up the stairs before anyone noticed she was gone. I sat a moment longer, letting the air settle, letting the humiliation burn itself into something sharper. Something that looked a lot like clarity. Then I rose. This house, this man, this history, it wasn't going to define me anymore. Not after tonight. I walked up the stairs slowly, each step solid beneath my feet, the wooden leaf warm in my palm. I realized I was done letting him decide who I was. That thought settled in me like a new kind of breath. Slow, steady, solid. I climbed the last step out of the cellar and pushed the door open. The smell of roasted turkey, half-finished casseroles, and store-bought pie greeted me, but it felt distant, foreign, like a life that had quietly carried on without me. The room didn't go silent when I stepped in. No gasps, no concern, just a few heads turning, then turning back, like someone had come in late from the bathroom, like I was a pause in a sentence they were eager to finish. Eldon looked up from his plate, folded his napkin with mechanical neatness, and said, "Well, glad you finally calmed down." Calmed down. He had shoved me, hard enough to bruise, thrown me toward a door like I was an embarrassment, but now I was the one who needed to calm down. I stood there for a beat too long. No one moved to offer me a seat, so I walked back to mine, like it still belonged to me. It didn't. My plate was gone, not pushed aside, not covered. Gone. The space where it had been was cleared and replaced with a folded napkin, the kind you set out when someone leaves early. Seren's was untouched. Trenton's plate looked like a second serving. My mother's food sat cold and barely touched. Lenora spoke without lifting her eyes. "We thought you left." Not asked if I had left. She told me. A sentence dressed like concern, but I could hear the truth underneath it. They'd hoped I had. Serene instinctively reached for her plate to share it with me, nudging it an inch my way, but Eldon looked up just enough to freeze her in place. Her hand stopped midair. She looked at me, unsure. I just shook my head and sat down without a word. No one offered me food. No one passed a dish. No one asked where I'd been, and I didn't ask them to. The conversation carried on like I was background noise. Trenton bragging about a renovation he was probably getting commissioned for, Mom asking how the pastor's wife was handling her daughter's divorce, the normal dance of surface-level talk. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the folded napkin where my meal should have been. My chest felt tight. Not angry, not yet. Just tired. Tired in a way that had been building for decades. The voices faded as my thoughts drifted, not to the cellar, but to every holiday where I had felt exactly like this. Uninvited at my own table, the birthdays with no card, the graduation speech where Dad congratulated Trenton instead. The one Christmas when Trenton got a watch and I got socks, then got told, "You're hard to shop for." Maybe I was. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe I was the problem. The thoughts came in heavy, sharp waves. I could hear Eldon's old phrases echoing in my head. Can't trust a soft man. You don't earn love, you keep it. Some boys just don't have it in them. I used to brush them off. Not tonight. Tonight they landed. Seren's hand found mine under the table. A squeeze. No words, just grounding. I closed my eyes for half a second, and when I opened them, I looked down, noticed the edge of Juniper's wooden leaf peeking out of my pocket. That tiny carved shape was the only thing in this house that still felt honest. Lenora cleared her throat. Well, she said in a voice that tried too hard to be cheerful, before dessert, we have something to share. Eldon smiled, not the kind you offer out of kindness, but the kind that masks something. A wolf smile. Trenton stood up, holding an envelope. He tapped it against his palm, like a teacher preparing to deliver grades. We wanted to make this holiday meaningful, he said. So we're stepping up to help Dad with his medical bills. I sat up, surprised. Help? After all these months of silence? But he kept going. And since Merrick refused, we all agreed it's best he step back from family decisions going forward. I blinked. The words didn't make sense at first. Refused? Family decisions? The room didn't pause. Just me. Eldon gave a firm nod, adding, It's for the best. A man who won't support his father has no place leading this family. Leading? I'd never even been invited to lead. Never had a voice in any decision that mattered. But Lenora twisted the knife. We thought it would be easier this way. Less tension for everyone. Seren gasped. Juniper looked around the table, confused. I stared at the floor, unable to feel my feet beneath me. So this was it. The real gift of the holiday. Exclusion, packaged neatly, served with pie. Trenton passed out dessert plates with a proud smile. One for Lenora, one for Dad, one for himself. None for me. I stared at the tablecloth. The pattern blurred. For a second, just a second, I thought about apologizing. Not because I had done anything wrong, but because I wanted it to stop. I wanted the cold to go away. I wanted, foolishly, to feel like I belonged. But I couldn't. Not anymore. The dust from the cellar still clung to my jeans. My arm ached from where I hit the wall. And in my pocket, Juniper's leaf felt like a stone. No one spoke to me. No one looked my way. I was there, but not there. Seren slid her fingers into mine again. This time, I squeezed back. Juniper leaned toward me. Dad, she whispered, can we go? I wanted to say yes, wanted to grab my coat and never look back, but something inside whispered, not yet. I looked across the table and saw Eldon. Really saw him. The smirk, the posture, the satisfaction on his face. He was enjoying this. Every piece of it. Every flinch. Every drop of shame. And something shifted. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just clear. The ache didn't leave, but it became something sharper. The bitterness became fuel. The fog in my chest thinned. No, I wasn't done. Not yet. I straightened in my chair. The conversation around the table kept moving like I hadn't spoken, like I hadn't just been pushed into a cellar by the man across from me. Trenton was back to charming the room with another story about a business trip to Dallas, throwing in names none of us knew as if we should be impressed. But Juniper's voice, Dad, can we leave, was still ringing in my ears. And Eldon's smug satisfaction, that slow, measured cruelty he always wore like a perfectly knotted tie, tightened something in my chest I could no longer ignore. My time of silence was up. I folded my hands in front of me, my voice low but unmistakably clear. Before we go any further, I need every one of you to hear this." The sound of forks stopped. Glasses hovered in midair. Slowly, like a room learning a new language, everyone turned toward me. Eldon paused mid-bite, chewing slower now. Trenton leaned back with a grin already forming. Lenora's brow furrowed. Serene's hand slid to rest gently against my wrist. Juniper held onto the hem of my shirt, eyes wide but calm. They expected me to embarrass myself, maybe even lose control. That was always their assumption, that I was too fragile to hold my ground. But I wasn't the boy in the corner anymore. I was the man who had been quietly holding 1,000 cuts for decades, and tonight I'd finally stopped bleeding for them. "I'm done," I said, my voice steady. "Letting you talk about me like I'm not even here. I'm done pretending I'm the problem, just so the rest of you can play the part of the noble, burdened family." Eldon scoffed without looking up. Trenton's smirk widened. Lenora whispered, "Merrick, don't start this." But I wasn't starting anything. I was finally finishing what they'd avoided for years. I kept going. I've taken it, the silence, the condescension, the backhanded praise, if you can even call it that. I let myself believe that if I just stayed quiet long enough, maybe you'd respect me, or even love me. I heard the soft shift of Seren drawing in a breath beside me. But now, I see it clearly. You didn't want me silent because you needed peace. You wanted me silent so I wouldn't remind you of your own guilt. Eldon shoved back his chair. It scraped loudly against the wood floor, a sharp declaration of power. He rose to his full height, towering over the table. The room tightened with that old weight, the one he used to command without effort. "A man like you," he said, voice cold, "has no right to challenge me. Not in my house." He took a step toward me. "Watch your words." Years ago, that would have worked. I would have dropped my gaze, said nothing, swallowed the shame. Not tonight. I met his stare head on and said, "I'm not 10 years old anymore, Dad." The silence that followed didn't feel awkward. It felt earned. Eldon leaned down closer to me, his breath sour with gravy and scorn. "If you push me tonight, Merrick," he said in a whisper only I could hear, "I promise I'll push back harder. You won't like what I can do." Ah, there it was, the real Eldon, not the decorated veteran, not the neighborhood legend, not the wise patriarch, just a bitter man who relied on fear to keep control. But I didn't flinch. "You don't scare me anymore." And for a split second, so fast no one else noticed, his eyes flickered. That was all I needed. Trenton slammed his fork down. "Oh, come on, Merrick. Always with the drama." Lenora let out a quiet gasp. My mother mumbled my name like it was a prayer, and a warning rolled into one. Juniper didn't move, but her small hand squeezed mine tight. "And Serene?" She ran her thumb slowly over my wrist, steady, calm, reminding me I wasn't standing alone. The room shifted, slightly, but I felt it. For once, Eldon didn't own the silence. I did. I took a breath and stood. "I've given this family my time, my support, and more patience than any of you ever deserved," I said. "But I won't give you my dignity. Not anymore." Eldon's mouth twisted, working side to side like he was biting down on something foul. Trenton looked to him, waiting for a signal, some cue to keep the show moving. But I wasn't following the script anymore. "If you want to fight me, Dad," I said clearly, "you'll get one, but it won't be the kind you can win with threats." Those words hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore, impossible to take back. Eldon raised his hand, not in anger, but like he was pointing out something rotten on the table. "This isn't over," he said, the words grinding between his teeth. I met his gaze and replied, "I know, but neither am I." The silence that followed was different from any other I'd experienced at that table. Not icy, not cruel, just real. And maybe, for the first time, honest. That thought settled somewhere deep in my chest as I watched Eldon lean back in his chair like a man preparing for a performance. The dining room lights cast long shadows across the table, and the clatter of forks from a few lingering bites faded until only the hum of the refrigerator and my heartbeat filled the room. Everyone was waiting for him to say the next thing, to take back control, to put the night back on track. But I could tell, by the way his fingers tapped that slow, deliberate rhythm on the tablecloth, that he wasn't aiming for peace. He was aiming for damage. Seren stiffened beside me, her posture straight and alert, as if bracing for an impact she couldn't predict. Juniper slid a little closer to me, gripping her fork tight in her small hand like it could protect her. I placed a hand on her shoulder, steadying both of us. Eldon finally positioned his napkin just so, tugged the edges of the tablecloth into alignment, and cleared his throat. The whole room stilled instantly. Trenton's eyes brightened the way they always did when Eldon was about to lay down the truth. Lenora let out a relieved sigh, convinced he was about to restore the order she clung to. Mother folded her hands like she was waiting for a sermon. I knew that look in Eldon's eyes, the one he used before punishing me as a kid. Cold resolve disguised as righteousness. He didn't want to intimidate me now. He wanted to break me. He laced his fingers together and said, loud enough to fill every corner of the dining room, "You all think Merrick's the victim here, but you don't know the whole story." My stomach tightened. Serene's fingers found mine under the table. Her grip was warm, strong. I whispered, "He's about to twist something. Don't believe it." She nodded, but didn't release my hand. Eldon continued, savoring each word. "You think he's responsible? You think he's some noble son who helps this family? Let me tell you what really happened with the money I gave him years ago." I felt the air shift. People leaned in. Even the guests, folks from his church group, straightened in their chairs. I said quietly, "Don't do this. Not in front of my wife. Not in front of my kid." He smiled as if I had just given him permission. "Why not, Merrick? Maybe you should have thought about that before embarrassing me." Then he stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Merrick stole from this family." The words cracked through the room like a dropped glass. "He took $10,000 from me," he continued, "and never paid it back." Seren gasped. Juniper's fork dropped onto her plate. I felt the heat rise up my neck. "That's not true," I said, shooting to my feet. "You gave me that money when Serena had her surgery. You gave it freely. It wasn't a loan." Eldon slammed his palm on the table. "That's what you tell people. But you forged the signature on the loan form. I kept the paperwork. I have proof." Proof. Of course he used that word. He knew exactly what it would do. The room inhaled collectively. Mother pressed a trembling hand over her lips. Lenora murmured, "Merrick, how could you?" Trenton let out a short laugh, one he tried and failed to hide behind his napkin. I stared at Eldon, unable to understand how deeply he'd prepared for this moment. He'd saved those papers. He'd waited for a night like this. He wanted an audience. And he wanted to humiliate me in front of the only people who still meant something to me. I clenched my fists at my sides, voice cracking with desperation. That form wasn't alone. It was a gift. You even wrote, "A man who lies about money will lie about anything," Eldon cut in. His eyes then shifted to Seren with a cold, deliberate calm. "You really think you know your husband?" Seren stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly. "Eldon, stop it. Don't drag me into this." He snapped his head toward her. "Stay out of it." Juniper flinched at the sound. My whole body tensed. The room was a storm now. Whispers, murmurs, the rustle of people shifting uncomfortably. But none of them intervened. Not one. Eldon drew in a slow breath and gathered himself for the finishing blow. When he spoke again, his voice was low, but unmistakably sharp. "You are a disgrace to this family. The day you were born, I knew you'd amount to nothing." A single, quiet line. One he'd rehearsed for years. It struck harder than any shove, any insult, any cellar door slamming in my face. Juniper's eyes welled instantly. Seren's chest rose and fell like she was holding back her own fury. I felt stripped bare in front of everyone. All the humiliation of the night pooled in my gut, dark and suffocating. But then, the fog cleared, just enough to see the truth. Nothing I ever did would earn fairness here, or decency, or even basic humanity. Not from him, not from the ones who sat silently by. Only Seren, only Juniper, only the family I built. I lowered myself slowly back into my seat, my body heavy with the weight of years I never fully acknowledged. For a moment, I closed my eyes, letting the ache settle, letting it burn through me. Then something shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but definitively. I opened my eyes, steady and clear. He had just played his biggest card. But I wasn't broken. Not anymore. This was the moment I understood exactly what needed to happen next. I pressed my palm against the wooden leaf in my pocket, the one Juniper made with her small hands, the one Eldon carelessly stepped on earlier, and I felt a spark of resolve sharpen inside me. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to shrink. I wasn't going to explain myself to people who'd already chosen their story. I raised my head. Eldon's eyes were still on me, expecting defeat. But that wasn't what he saw. Not tonight. I stood slowly enough that the room seemed to tilt with the movement, and he didn't yet understand that something inside me had just turned to steel. My eyes locked on Eldon, and though he sat barely 6 feet away, the space between us felt wider than the last 4 decades. No one told me to sit, not this time, not even him. I kept my tone flat, quiet, but clear enough for every soul in the room to hear. "I think it's time we stop pretending." Eldon's mouth twitched. Trenton leaned forward like he expected me to lose control. They were waiting for the boy they remembered, the one who snapped, who flinched, who eventually crumbled. But that boy wasn't here anymore. I wasn't moving to anger. I was moving with purpose. I turned slightly to face my wife, my daughter, and then the rest of them. "I'm not going to let you smear me in front of my family. Not anymore. And I'm not going to let you twist the truth to fit whatever story works best for your pride." Eldon let out a scoff that tried to pass for laughter. "The truth? You wouldn't recognize it if it hit you in the mouth." Lenora muttered something under her breath, maybe a weak attempt to call him off. He ignored her. Seren stepped in beside me, her arm brushing mine. Juniper's little hand reached for her mother's, not in fear, but solidarity. I pressed my hands gently on the edge of the table. "I'm done letting you rewrite my life." The room went still. Eldon shoved back his chair with a groan of wood against tile and jabbed a finger toward my chest. You think you can threaten me in my house? You think you're going to walk in here and flip the story over my records? You'll regret this. I promise you. But before I could answer him, before anyone could say a word, a voice rang out behind us. Is this what you wanted them to see, Eldon? We turned in unison. And there she was, Mother. She stood in the hallway, trembling but upright, holding a thick manila folder with shaking hands. Eldon's folder. The M folder from his locked cabinet. But this wasn't the usual pile of birthday cards or old report cards. These were different. Seren leaned into me. Juniper's eyes widened as she clutched her mom's waist. Eldon's whole face drained of color. Mother flipped a page slowly. These are insurance forms, she said quietly, almost like she didn't believe her own voice. Filed under Merrick's name, but the signature, it's not his. My breath caught. Serene's hand gripped mine tighter. Trenton muttered, "Mom, what are you doing?" But she wasn't done. I heard the yelling, she said, her voice rising. So I went to your office. I knew something was wrong. These were shoved behind the drawer, Eldon. Behind it. Eldon stepped toward her like a man used to people flinching away. But Trenton blocked him. Too slow. Too late. Everyone had seen her. Heard her. And now, everyone was watching him. Eldon snapped, voice cracking under the weight of losing control. "Give me those forms. Now." But Mother didn't move. She didn't hand them over. She didn't shrink. She looked right at him, like she was finally seeing him for what he was. "Merrick never borrowed that money," she whispered. "You forged his name." The silence after that was deafening. I could feel the heat in my throat, the weight behind my ribs. He did it. He really did it. Then she turned the page. Her eyes scanned the second sheet, and whatever was written there sent her hand to the wall for balance. She read it aloud. Life insurance beneficiary. Switched from spouse to parent. A pause. She blinked. Filed without consent. Seren gasped. I went cold. I hadn't touched that policy in years. I barely remembered we even had one. It had been set up when Juniper was born, back when I still believed Eldon only wanted the best for his grandchild. But he had changed it. He had made himself the primary, without a word, without a signature, without a soul knowing. Lenora's hands flew to her mouth. Trenton stumbled back like he'd been slapped. "Dad," he said, voice thin and uncertain. What did you do?" Eldon opened his mouth, but no sound came. Then, softly, venomously, he said, "It's not what it looks like." Mother took a step away from him. "How long have you been doing this?" she asked, tears now slipping freely down her cheeks. "How many other papers did you forge? What else have you been hiding?" The mask slipped, not into guilt, but into rage. His face contorted with something feral, something desperate. It was like watching a cornered animal lashing out, but he had nowhere left to strike. And now, I stepped forward. My shoes made the smallest creak against the wood floors, those old planks beneath us groaning not under my weight, but under years of his lies. "You told me I was worthless," I said, voice steady. "You made me believe I was weak. You let everyone around this table think I was the disappointment." Eldon tried to cut in. "No," I said sharply. "You don't speak now." The room fell dead still. For the first time in my life, they listened to me. Not him. Me. I took another step closer. "You didn't just try to control me," I said. "You tried to erase me. You tried to profit off my death." Eldon recoiled. A real flinch. The kind you don't fake. And it was all I needed. "You never wanted a son," I continued. "You wanted a product. A file. a form you could file away until you cashed in. The air thinned. Mother sobbed. Seren wrapped Juniper in both arms, shielding her from the wreckage of a man she once called Granddad. Trenton stared at the floor like he couldn't bear to look at either of us, and somewhere in that silence, I saw the crack begin. Not a loud break, but a quiet shatter in the foundation of everything he built. And for the first time ever, Eldon took a step back. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't point. He just stood there, staring at me like he couldn't believe I was still standing, but I was, and I wasn't going anywhere. Not after everything that finally surfaced. The room felt tighter than ever, but my mind had never been clearer. Eldon staggered back a few inches, still trying to hide behind the same confidence he used all my life. But the fear in his eyes said more than any words he ever tried to throw at me. I kept my voice controlled. You did all of this, and you still think you deserve respect? He tried to reach for the scattered papers on the table, as if sweeping them away would rewrite what everyone had heard. His hand shook, not much, but enough. Merrick forged the signatures, he barked. He stole from us. Everything I did was to protect this family. Mother winced at the accusation. Trenton whispered, "Dad, stop." Lenora lowered her head, but Eldon kept going, piling lies on top of lies, louder each second. You think he's some decent son? He's nothing. He has always been... No, I said, stepping between him and the table. Tonight I get the final word. The sentence felt like a door locking behind the past. I didn't shout, I didn't tremble, but the room froze. Everything you built, I said quietly, was built on fear, and tonight, that ends. He tried to rise again, reaching for some last bit of control. You want truth? He snapped. Tell them about the money you took, the lies. You already said enough, I told him. He laughed once, a short, bitter sound. You think anyone here will believe you over me? Seren stepped forward. We don't have to guess. Eldon turned sharply toward her, ready to strike with words. But she lifted her phone and tapped the screen. A recording played back into the room. If you push me tonight, Merrick, I'll push back harder. You won't like what I can do. His exact threat. Clear as daylight. Mother's breath caught. Trenton stepped away from him. Juniper held her mother tighter. Serene's voice trembled, but not from fear. I recorded him when he got close to Merrick. I knew he'd deny everything. Eldon's face drained. He took a step back, then another, like he was realizing the ground wasn't solid anymore. Mother whispered, "What happened to you, Eldon?" He muttered, "I did what I had to." But the sentence broke halfway through. I stepped closer, not to hurt him, but to end the story he'd tried to force on me. You forged documents. You changed my insurance without consent. You tried to tear down my family, but you failed. His lips parted, searching for something to say, but nothing came. Mother walked toward my side. Trenton stared at the floor like he couldn't believe the man he tried to impress all his life. Lenora clutched her hands together, silent but shaken. Eldon wasn't the titan he pretended to be. He was just a man caught in his own lies. I knelt so Juniper could hear me clearly. This is why you stand up for yourself, I told her softly. Even when the person hurting you shares your blood, especially then. She nodded and hugged me with all the strength her small arms had. I looked back at Eldon one final time. I'm leaving. Not because you pushed me out, but because I understand now that I never needed your approval. Mother whispered, Merrick, I'm sorry. I squeezed her hand gently. You don't have to pick a side. Just choose what's right. Seren gathered our things. Juniper slipped into her coat. We walked toward the front door slowly, not hiding, not rushing, just moving with the kind of clarity I'd been waiting for all my life. Behind us, Eldon sank into a chair as if his whole world had dropped out from under him. He muttered to himself, broken, but for once his words carried no weight. When we stepped onto the porch, the cool night air felt like a release. I slipped the wooden leaf from my pocket and rolled it between my fingers. The same leaf that began this unraveling. Tonight it meant something different. I'd broken the cycle, I'd protected my family, and I'd finally stepped free from a house that never held space for me. I breathed in deeply, steady and sure. Thanksgiving didn't end the way I imagined, but it ended with truth. And with that truth, I finally became the father mine never was.